DC Academy Livestream podcast, whatever we want to call this thing. It's available in many many ways that you can consume this content. With me, as always, is Peter Chalmers. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well, actually.
Excellent.
Look, we haven't done this for a while. It's a bright, sunny day. It's warm. I'm happy.
Excellent. Slightly colder where I am. Today we have our first repeat guest, Peter. First time by popular demand we've had a guest back on. So welcome, Ian, and welcome back to the live stream.
Yeah.
So what we thought we would cover today, we sort of last time we had a debate around developing directly in production and how you assess the risk of a particular change. And Ian, you're championing the idea that with the right controls and boundaries in place, that there is a way that you can have speed and agility and the right processes to allow changes to flow through systems. And off air, you've told us some examples of some organizations you know of that have very slow speed in terms of how they can get changes to production, and some views on how to improve that. But we didn't really touch on last time on the actual product and company that you've been key to bringing to life. So we thought today we might dive into Elements Cloud and understand what it is a bit more. And if the technology works, which I have faith that it will, a bit of a demo and understanding of how admins can use this tool to benefit themselves, their organizations, and improve their agility in making changes to their Salesforce org.
Sure. Absolutely.
Excellent. So, should we go back to the beginning, Ian? How did the idea for the product come about, and what was the kind of key first problem that you were looking to solve?
So it started back in 1997, 2001, where I was running another company, which was all around selling to Fortune 500 companies. We were one of the first Salesforce customers in the UK. So there were two guys in a rented office in Basingstoke sold us this cloud thing. And our CIO, who was actually the CIO of Elements, said, right, if it's in Excel, I want to kill it. Everything's in Salesforce. And we built out 285 custom objects because there was no app exchange. There was nothing apart from 5 objects. And over time, we built it, had an international company. Salesforce was the hub of everything. That got acquired by TIBCO in 2011, and we all sort of retired and did bits and pieces. And then I got the band back together again and said, let's do something again. And we said, well, let's go and solve the problem that we wanted when we were running a very complex Salesforce org. How do we manage all of the metadata? How do we manage the processes? How do we make sure that the huge investment we put into Salesforce, we can not just justify, but we can get a real return on investment? And then how do we make sure it stays agile? Because one of the things is, when you first start, Salesforce is massively agile. That's why people go for it. I completely understand that. But the more you put into it, quite often the less agile it becomes, and therefore the real thing that you bought it for starts to become a problem. And the whole idea of technical debt, starting to basically build, your arteries are clogging up just because you can't get around that cycle fast enough. And I think this has really come to a head in the last 6 months, where companies have had to change their business models, change the way they work quite dramatically. Someone said digital transformation used to be an interesting idea 5 years off. It's now something that's going to happen in 5 weeks or 5 months. And that's put enormous pressure on admins, developers, CRM owners to say, how do we implement changes in Salesforce more quickly, but also safely? So that's really the genesis of this. And it started with mapping processes and then starting to understand what was inside an org, pulling the metadata. And to be honest, after that initial idea, a lot of the product development's been driven by customers saying, that's great, Ian, but could you? So we got a reasonably large development team and a roadmap that stretches beyond the eye can see in terms of ideas about what we can do. But we've got to a point now where we can pull an org's metadata, no matter how big the org is, and do some amazing analysis, so people can suddenly see, like, what have they actually got. So that's really where we've got to now. And we've spent time thinking about how you get around the implementation lifecycle more quickly and basically filling in the gaps or partnering. So say working with Capado for how you fill in that whole cycle so we can go all around.
And the type of customer that's going for this, Ian, is that bigger, more complex end, or you've got some small, nimble customers who almost use it from day one to make sure they stay agile?
I would say that the sweet spot is 3 years old. They've got beyond the honeymoon period of this is going to be amazing. I saw the brochure and said that this is not an issue. You push the button, it's all implemented. So 3 or 4 years in, maybe a couple of SIs have been in there, maybe a couple of regime changes, is a place where the customers see the value of Salesforce, are struggling to get that value out, and are already thinking both tactically, how do I fix stuff, but strategically, how do I improve the speed to value or time to value. It doesn't have to be any business company. It could be a relatively small non-profit all the way up to Salesforce's largest customers.
Interesting term, that speed to value. I like that term. It's not something that gets thrown about at all. You started with what you said was, something that people can use to analyze their org. What kind of things can you analyze around that? What kind of information will we get?
Well, the first thing is most orgs have no documentation whatsoever. People haven't even filled the description fields in. So the first thing is we're pulling all the metadata and putting it into a metadata dictionary, which is constantly kept up to date with all the orgs. Okay. So anyone who goes, oh, I've got Excel spreadsheets to manage, the answer is Excel's not a database. Okay? Excel is out of date the moment you've started. So the first thing is how do you use the metadata API to pull everything out and make sense of it? So you're not like fighting away, wading your way through setup to go, okay, I understand where everything is. This is a field, it's got this type. This is an Apex class. This is a dashboard. But then it's the interrelationships. This dashboard, it pulls from these reports. Those reports pull from those fields. This field is used in those 4 validation rules. It's used in those 2 process builder workflows. And it's all those interrelationships. Someone said a lot of Salesforce is like glitter. You can't get rid of it once you've got it. Yeah, you add a record type, that's it, you've got it forever, because it's in so many places and you daren't pull it out. You daren't change a field or remove a field because you don't know why it was put there. If you don't know why, and you can't just assume, oh, I used field trip and it said there's no data. Really? It might be used in some integration. It may only be transient data. You can't just go, there doesn't seem to be any data, I'll pull it out. Yeah. So people just add another field. And if there's no naming conventions, there's no way of searching through the fields easily, you end up with shoe size and then size of shoe, and then shoe dash size. So I've now got 3 fields, no idea which one I'm meant to be using. So it's all of this sort of, if you don't know what's there, you don't change it. So I'll just add another one until you hit 500 fields, and then write a check to get to 800 fields, and then you're screwed.
Yeah. It's pure technical debt, isn't it? Just through time.
Absolutely.
So
and nobody wants to document, so we do as much automated documentation as we can based on the metadata API, our code, and the tools API and the dependency API. But then we made it easy so people can add their own documentation. You're happy to tweet about getting a badge, so at least put 140 characters in about why I created this thing. And we make it easy. Enter it in Salesforce, enter it in our application, enter it in our mobile app. So we're trying to think of places where people are at the point of documentation and saying, it's there, just add it. And it's not what, it's why. I can probably work out what you did, but what was in your mind why did you do that? That's the valuable insight that seems to be missing in lots of orgs.
And Ian, you've got a diagram, which we're just bringing up on screen now, that kind of walks through this cycle as you have it.
Is it up on screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we talk about this, the implementation lifecycle, and it's interesting. Trailhead is fantastic for training people on the features and how to customize Salesforce. but it almost assumes some knowledge. I understand how to implement an application. And for people who are as old as me, we've come out of, I mean, I came out of Accenture. That's true. But if you've come from, as a lot of people are coming into Salesforce from other walks of life, understanding the implementation lifecycle is not necessarily apparent. So this whole idea that you're operating Salesforce, you're capturing some sort of feedback from end users going, it would be great if you could do this in a different way. That then needs to be captured as some form of requirements. A requirement is not necessarily the specification. Just because I said I wanted this doesn't mean that's necessarily correct or complete. I want a new pick list value. Okay, but if you don't want a new pick list value, do you need a report? There are other things associated with just having a pick list value. So you need to understand the business processes to validate the requirements and then identify the ones that maybe have been missed, or even work out that what the end user wanted is not what they need. Maybe it's not a pick list value, maybe it's a new record type. So we need to try and avoid being a just admin. I'll just do that, I'll just do that, I'll just do that. You need to be an admin who can push back and go, let me think about this, let me understand why you're meant to be doing this, and then I can understand the right way of architecting it. Because then it won't come back to bite me later on. And then the other thing is this org impact analysis, as Peter said. We are then giving you some insights into, if I make that change, what's implied? Which then means we can build some user stories where, as you said at the beginning of this session, we can then apply some form of risk associated with it. Oh, this is a simple change. Oh, this is a complex change. And I was talking to someone from Capado earlier who said, yeah, but a dashboard is obviously a simple change. Yeah, but it might be. But if that dashboard is pulling on reports and those reports don't have the right data coming into from the right fields are being populated with the correct data, that dashboard actually is a high risk thing, because we're now, the management is driving the business based on a dashboard of invalid data. You need to be able to look through the dashboard to the report, to the field. So that impact analysis, if we understand the user stories, we can then pass it into the development cycle, be that declarative or code. And then at that point, we also hope there's some documentation being added to these other things we're changing, because we're then building the institutional knowledge of why we did things. And that, I think, as you said, is the bit that gets missed. The number of people we talked to said, I have no idea what's in this org. I have no idea why. The admin's gone. And interesting enough, we're starting to see people having conversations about, do I throw the org away, or and start again, or do I rebuild? And a lot of people going, let's just start again because we don't know what's there. We're discovering if we can start to instrument the org, they can actually work out how to pick their way out of it rather than throwing it away and starting again. Maybe we'll sort of pick that up as a discussion at the end about the implications.
Yeah.
So we don't do very much here. We do the documentation piece. Out here, you've got, that's what Salesforce is good at. And then you start to think about tools like Capado or change sets if you're particularly masochistic, for driving the changes through, through the different sandboxes through to production. In the deliver phase, fine, we get involved in release, because you're not just releasing the new app, you're releasing the training material, which is basically some of this analysis documentation, or some of this documentation here can be repurposed as training material. So you'll release that, and then back down here, we're talking about, we're back around the cycle now. Compliance says in a highly regulated industry, we've now got the up-to-date processes that we can prove to the regulator we're following due process. And then some of that documentation appears as training, and then we can capture feedback. And the trick is, can we get around this cycle quickly without breaking the org? So that is the cycle that people go through. We have changes in our org. We've got a fairly complex org, but our admins, some of the changes get put in overnight. Talking to a big customer, he said, we don't do overnight, we do 60 days. 60 days for any change. And if you're an end user, a little bit of your soul dies if you put in a change request, because it's not 2 months from now, the business will have moved on. So that's no longer valid. And probably it's whatever your change request is at the bottom of the queue anyway, so it never made it in.
It's funny, but I mean, when you think about it, 60 days isn't that long at the same time. It wasn't long ago. I mean, I used to work in FinServ, and if you got something done in 6 months, that was quick. So 60 days is quick, but we're also now, it's that expectation of, I need this, I need it by tomorrow type of thing, and you can deliver it with this tool set. So
it doesn't have to be major change. It could be, so if you could, like an example I put into our own org the other day, which is on that list view, you've given me the ID of the item, but if I had the description, I can make better. I won't have to click through to work out each one of those items. And the guy went, our admin went, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Okay, let me just check the implication. Yeah, it's in tomorrow. So it's Toyota used to talk about it's everybody's job to change the company by 1% every day. It's lots of little changes. Yeah, I get there are big changes, big system. We're going to put in CPQ. I get that. That's not an overnight job. That may be a 2-3 month. But it's these small incremental changes which are constantly evolving and improving the org. So we don't end up with page layouts that look like CVS receipts, like 3 foot long. Like, how do I get rid of the fields that aren't relevant to me? How do I add a little bit of a validation rule just to constantly just keep on tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking? So I think it's a balance. Excellent. Yeah, there's big change and little change, and it's trying to make sure that all the changes take the path of least resistance.
Excellent. So Ian, is there parts of this process that you're able to dive in and show us the application itself?
Yeah, and again, quite a capable product, comprehensive product. I'm absolutely not going to spend time on lots of things, but let me just touch the highlights of some of these things. So we'll start over here with training feedback. So I'm in here in a page layout. You probably all recognize it. Maybe this one's a bit shorter than yours. It goes on forever though. But you'll notice a little bit different. Instead of the gray icons, we've got purple icons, and that's where the pop-up help appears. So that could be a note about why this thing's used. It could be a process diagram. But let's not worry about that for the moment. Let's just think about, there's a button there called leave feedback. So as an end user, I could leave some feedback to say, this needs to be updated to a currency field. Someone else could reply. And we've now started that cycle. So someone's already made some changes there. I'll just say, I agree with that too. If I now go into Elements, so Elements doesn't run on Salesforce, it runs on AWS because we can do this for any application. It doesn't have to be Salesforce. It could be Workday, it could be ServiceNow, it could be SAP. So I'm now here in basically the queue of feedback. So now I've got one place where all this feedback's coming in. And I can now see, there's the feedback. I can even see it's associated with that field, the amount field. Oh, sorry, wrong one. This is the one we're looking at, budget field, sorry, budget field. This needs to be updated to a currency field. And I've now got some associated information. I can see the discussion. There's that discussion. But now I can see we've linked it to a requirement, or we've linked it to a user story. So we're capturing the requirements and the user stories in the context of the requirements. So we're going to have a look at, I won't spend lots of time on this, but let's go and have a look at, say, let me go and have a look at a user story. So the user story was linked to that feedback was, we want to update a budget. So the idea is, again, it's a list of user stories, but you see on the right-hand side, here's the user story, which roles are affected, sales team, project manager, description, acceptance criteria, and a link to Jira. So if you're using Jira, this is the user story that makes its way into Jira, into Capado. So we're not building silos, we are connecting things.
And is there some kind of integration there, Ian, to kind of make that easy? We use Jira for all of our projects. Where would you create that story first? Would you create it in Jira and it pulls into Elements, or the other way around?
Either way. Okay. So in an ideal world, it's business requirements driving user stories, which then make their way into Jira. But we understand that you're in Jira and you realize a user story is missing, so you add it in Jira. So it's a two-way synchronization. So if I'm in Jira here, now I'm in that Jira. This is the synchronized, it's come from us into Jira. But if I click on there, everything I showed you in that right panel is all there. So instead of having another silo, we've simply, with a Chrome extension, said that Jira content, everything we've given you, all the documentation, the notes associated with it, that discussion, which metadata items are implicated in this, they all came from the piece of work that was done in analysis. And now they're visible in Jira.
So the Chrome extension adds more context to Jira, not as well as Salesforce.
Correct. Correct.
Ah, very cool.
Right. So we're in Jira. So let's make our way into, let's say, Capado. So I'm now in Capado. Doesn't have to be Capado. It could be DevOps Center when that appears at the end of the next year. It could be, doesn't matter. But at the moment, I'm showing you in Capado. Here is the user story, same information. There's the documentation. But I want to add some more documentation because I'm now here. I could add a note, link to a URL. I could take a screenshot. So what we're trying to do is, we're the central documentation hub. As you move your way around the life cycle, we keep on adding to it rather than creating another spreadsheet or another quick document or another Google Drive. So I'm now in Capado. Let me go to the user stories and then the metadata items inside that user story inside Capado. Let's go look at a field. Excuse me. So we're now looking at a field. Just do a refresh on that. And again, with the Chrome extension, we're now pulling not the user story information, we're now talking about metadata items. So we're now going to pull the metadata analysis, which we built automatically. So what you can see with the Chrome extension is popping up on the right panel is, this is a field called budget. I can even update the Salesforce description or the Salesforce help text right here. But and now I've got...
That'll just push back into the org?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. I've got a tab here, an optimized tab. So if I want to do cleanup, it's basically a list of, it's a way of creating cleanup tasks. But here's the interesting piece. Now I can tell you this field is used in one formula field. And there's the formula field. It's used in 4-page layouts. Probably some of those aren't that valid. Project Pete in Finance is the name of that page layout. A number of reports, some validation rules. So I roll over that validation rule. That little icon here, if I want to go and open up that validation rule inside Salesforce, it will open that up in setup in that page. Let me just go, I'll open up the field. Let's leave that for a moment. Right, so, and then there are 11 places where we haven't found the field. So we look in 15 major metadata types. And record types is actually currently being built. Really hard to do, by the way. Record types can be listed by ID, record type, or API name. So fun fact, if you're looking at a process builder workflow, we had to write 42 different bits of code to pass a process builder workflow looking for field names. Because there are variables, so it's variable in. You can't just do a free text search because you'll get false positives because it could be in the comments. So it's actually quite complex the way it's all been architected. So that's a single level. This is just where is this used? But the answer is we have this idea of a dependency tree. So using the dependency API, we can now tell you this field. So there's the information about the field. But I can see that it's used in some layouts and a custom field. So I can see that it's used in a custom field, but actually if I click on that, that custom field is used in those page layouts, but that's all already called by another custom field, which is then called by some layouts. So the point about this is I think it's safe to change that, but I hadn't understood the implications that actually I need to think about that. So maybe I should add that to the manifest, or maybe I should add that as well. So what we're trying to do is take away a lot of those unknowns before you get into it. This view that I'm showing you here is available all the way back in our application in analysis phase. I would hope you weren't bumping into this stuff when you've got into, you're about to deploy. But again, the same information is here, and I could also see this inside setup. A couple of other things. Obviously, we've got the whole idea of documentation associated with a metadata item. Now, it's linked to some process diagrams. So this field is used in that process diagram, and it's used in that process. So we're mapping the processes in elements, which again is another type way that you're starting to use the same data around. And these process diagrams you could embed inside Salesforce as training material for a highly regulated organization. Yeah.
Excellent.
And then things like field access by permission set. And again, back to the requirements and the user stories. So again, I can see the context. So I think the important word is context. No matter where I am, I can see the other stuff, all of it drawn together. We're aggregating it all together. Yeah?
Cool.
The question then is, that's great, Ian, but where does it all come from? So this is our, what we call an org model. This is a synchronization of your metadata. So using the metadata API, we pull everything in the org into this tree structure. And we'll tell you how big it is, how many managed packages, how many custom objects, and it's a tree. So you can click on anything and open them up. And then the right-hand side is context sensitive. So if we go and find that object we were looking at before, which was down here, there we go. There's the project object. We'll tell you everything about the object. Things like, let's tell you how well populated every field is. So it automatically does
cool.
this for every single object. So you can go and have a look at it and notice that there are all those fields the users absolutely, definitely, absolutely needed and have never filled them out.
So your point of view, Ian, I imagine would be if I needed to jump in and learn something more about the object model, I wouldn't go to the setup menu in Salesforce. I would come to elements and get the same context as in the setup menu plus more.
Yeah, or I could go to setup. So I just clicked on that link. It's going to open up setup, and it's going to give you that same information inside setup. Once, I guess that's Astro, is it? There, we're opening up setup. Let's make it a bit smaller. It knows which org to go to, sandbox or production, and there's all that information. So we're popping all that stuff inside setup in the right panel. So you don't have to go to elements. We sync it, analyze it off platform, and then inject it back into Capado, into Jira, into Salesforce setup. So we'll tell you how many records by record type. You can add your documentation here. You can see the user stories and the requirements which are changing this object, and you can have a discussion about it. So there's some consistent themes here around. It's about linking user stories to requirements, to feedback, to metadata items, to process maps, to external documentation, delivered in one place rather than 15 different silos.
And so how would it work if, let's say you've used all these analysis tools that you've just shown and the org's in pretty good health. And then we get some new requirements for something net new, a new expense claim process. Where would the starting point be? Would that be the process maps that you've talked about, or would it be a step before that?
I think you might start with a process map. This is one of our process maps. You might start, if it's completely net new, expense process, yeah, let's map it out with the subject matter experts in live workshops. Really click to, I could switch to edit, start double clicking, all version controlled. So double click, add another box, double click, add a line between a box. So it's designed for the consultant, the admin, whoever talking to the end user. What's that step? Who does it? Oh, the project manager does it. So we'll drag a project manager onto that. You can start to see we're adding documentation here. This is now linked to the budget field. So we're saying what metadata item is used in this particular step. So yeah, and then any one of these I could drill down to the next level of detail. So you can build out from the highest level, keep it simple, but then drilled into more detail. So you might start there. And when you're there, you might start thinking, well, there's a new requirement. So why wouldn't I either link an existing requirement or create a new one? So again, you don't have to go to the requirement page. If I'm in a process map in a workshop and we're identifying requirements, let's add them here. And then could we add a note, a URL, some other documentation? Now, the interesting thing is over here in my tree of data, I may not have that object in yet. So now I've got a problem, which is I can't add any documentation to something which doesn't exist in Salesforce. So instead, I could simply go to, it doesn't matter where, but I could right mouse click and say, add a proposed object. So I could see
that was going to be my next question. Yeah, how do you document what needs to be created to fulfill the requirements?
So we call that expense HHH. I've now created it. I can now document it. When this item with this label and this API name is created in Salesforce, it will connect the two.
Right. And is that like potentially on your roadmap that you could take the information you gather and actually go through the metadata API and create this field later on?
Absolutely. I mean, we already push descriptions and help text in. But we're going to have to recreate quite a lot of the wizards that you would do when you're going through creating an object, creating a field. But absolutely, we could do that and use the API.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's probably some low-hanging fruit there, because those wizards aren't the most efficient user experience, shall we say.
And really, you almost want to create a manifest. So rather than going through one by one, you want to go,
exactly.
This is associated with a release, push it in as one go. So it's not uncontrolled, it's not bumping into in lots of different places. But absolutely. So you would start with requirements coming in, you'd start with, but the heart of this, I think, is understanding the business process, because that validates the requirements and identifies new ones. And then you can start to either create new metadata items or link to existing ones. And then we're around the cycle again. One thing, I talked about documentation. We didn't quite finish the cycle off. So if I think about, I'm here in my project object, and I've got some documentation, how to run projects, adding records. I can make these visible inside any documents that we have here in our database. I can make them visible as help. So do you remember where we started?
So with the purple, yeah.
So if I went to the budget field, let's go and add another item to this list. So where we go down to the budget field. And of course I could do this here. I could do it inside setup, because all this information is available inside setup. Budget field, add a new document. I'm going to add a new help document called blah, blah, blah. Whatever, adding multi-currencies, attach that, and then say, show as help in Classic or Lightning. So it's now available. Let's go back to the page. I haven't refreshed it. There it is.
And is that designed for just admins, Ian, or all end users?
The admin would add it, but what I'm looking at here would be an end user view. So
that you would encourage, do they need the Chrome extension to do that? Would all end users be using the extension? Yep.
Yeah, they need the extension. And as an end user, I can now rate it and go, actually, that's not very helpful. So we're now capturing how many times the help was viewed, who viewed it, and the ratings. So
cool.
again,
so there's a really important step there, that you're pulling the end users into the feedback loop and the going around the cycle to ultimately improve the experience, because often admins may make assumptions as to what they think is useful to their end users without the right consultation. So this is really democratizing a little bit, where improvements need to be made.
At point of need, I'm in here going, oh, that's so annoying. I can add the feedback right there, not go, okay, I need to go and post it to an Excel spreadsheet, or you've created a custom object. Well, I've now got to go and say, oh, it's the project system object and it's the budget field. If I just leave feedback there, all that's done for you. And we do get customers going, I don't want end users to leave me feedback. I'd like people in the system leave me feedback. So we are getting to a situation where by profile you can determine who leaves feedback. Right. So as we get very big orgs, they don't want everyone leaving feedback, and I guess I understand that because you end up being overwhelmed maybe as an admin with lots of squeaky wheels going, can't you move that field one to the left? Can't you move that field down? But I think your point is well made, which is we need to capture feedback from end users when they are pissed off about it so that we can then action it. And we could act, if it's just a case of put a validation role on this, we could action this. All right. This needs to be a currency field. Okay, that's a bigger issue, but a validation rule could be put on relatively easily. Yep.
Yeah. Sort of final-ish question from me. Is there somewhere in the application where you effectively map your release cycle? So if you've got 2 sandboxes that you go through before getting to production, is Elements talking to both sandboxes and production, or just production? How does that kind of life cycle get mapped?
Okay, so if you think about managing metadata through those sandboxes, that's not us. That would be a Capado, a change sets, whatever. In terms of this tree structure, which we looked at, we build one of those for every org. So production and multiple sandboxes. Okay, so there will be a separate one for every org.
Right.
Which leads to the next question, which is, if I add documentation, where should I add it? The answer is, I don't care. We hold the documentation at the implementation level. So if I add a document here in this sandbox, it will instantly be visible in all the other sandboxes in production. If I add some discussion points here, those discussion points, those notes will be instantly visible across every sandbox in production.
Right. So let's say I create a new field in a sandbox. I create some documentation against that. The field doesn't exist in production right now, so it but as soon as, for example, Capado deploys that change, your system would, based on API name or otherwise, connect the dots, and that documentation would just start appearing.
Correct. So the new metadata item would appear in the org with all the documentation that's traveled all the way through the pipeline.
Cool.
And that was a big architectural decision we made early on, and I'm very glad. We started off at a single org and relatively quickly went, no, this is wrong, and we re-architected it to be held everything at an implementation level so that therefore we could manage it all the way through the pipeline.
Cool.
So our own org, sorry, our own company, I think we've got 14 sandboxes. So we claim to be the best run org on the planet. I mean, our CRO, head of sales, says if you've got a better org, we'll give you Elements for free on any metric. We do about 40 change requests a month, of which 50% go straight into production. And we've not had a broken org in the last 3 years.
Very good.
3 years ago, we broke the org because there was a field used in an external integration, which we hadn't documented. So roadmap, I don't think it's this year, but it's probably next year, is not just pulling all the metadata items and the dependencies inside an org, but external. So we ingest Informatica or MuleSoft, and we'll tell you where else these metadata items are. And then go and reverse engineer, SAP or Oracle, whatever it's connected to. Because this tree structure is Salesforce, but we can build a tree structure for ServiceNow, for Oracle, for whatever. So you can then connect all the dots, which is, okay, the process touches that, then it goes into the ServiceNow, then it touches that. That's the process. These are the metadata items. Oh, hey, there's a diagram here or an ERD that then talks about how these all integrate.
Excellent. That's very powerful.
So again, it's, I think the really cool thing, apart from what I've shown you, is it takes about 2 minutes to set up a proof of concept, and an org takes between 10 minutes and 2 hours to sync and analyze, because we're analyzing every org every night. So I wrote an article just recently, sort of reflections on having analysed over 1 billion metadata items. So we've managed to get the metadata API to play nicely, and it's not straightforward. Trying to make it give you the same data all the time.
Can attest firsthand that is quite a feat you've accomplished there to do that in an efficient model.
And I think anybody goes, oh, I'm a bit of a developer, I'm a bit of admin, why don't I have a play with the metadata model and sit a metadata API and pull this out and stick in an Excel spreadsheet? And the answer is, well, we've got a dev team of 20 and we've been doing this for 4 years. So by all means, knock yourself out, but they've not been sitting on their hands for 4 years.
Yeah.
Excellent. So to wrap up, Ian, where should people go if they're interested in learning more about Elements Cloud?
Well, go to elements.cloud. The homepage has got a ton of information. Connect with one of us. You could go to the proof of concept page, but again, we've got you can use the application through your proof of concept for as long as you want to help you build that business case. So yeah, we're keen to talk to anybody who thinks they want to get around that life cycle more quickly. And at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about this idea: do you throw the org away, or do you try and rebuild?
Yeah, we said we'd come back to that.
I think throwing away an org is not an easy decision, or it shouldn't be. But it's often made because you haven't got any way of analysing the implications or how long it's going to take to unpick. And I like to think, and we've got an example of a customer I'm talking to at the moment. 12-year-old org, the architecture doesn't suit where they are currently. They're about to throw it away. Started using Elements, and they've now built a plan to unpick it and rebuild it with a level of confidence rather than throwing away and starting again. Now, I can't put a number on the implications of that yet because they're not the way through it. But even helping them, they had no way of making the decision. The decision was just, we have no idea, let's just walk away.
It's the forest situation, isn't it? Not being able to see forest for the trees.
Yeah, indeed.
And this helps you navigate all the way through it.
Yeah. And it's the same for consolidating orgs, same issue. They just throw it all away and start again. And I think that's an enormous risk to the business, and obviously enormous risk to Salesforce, because if the decision is, should we rebuild, the question then is, well, should we rebuild in Salesforce, or should we be looking at something else?
Mm.
Yep.
I think if you're a consultancy going into a client saying throw it all away and start again, and do you have a vested interest in that? I think unless you can show why that's the right decision, I think Elements starts to give you that view about, okay, click on that object and there's the tree, and you're like, that's going to take a while to unpick. Yeah. So we've again, as an admin or as a consultant, when they say, well, that can't take that long, opening up that tree and going, well, okay, it is a bit more involved than just change that field. Have you seen that it's used in 4 dashboards? You've got to change the value. You can start to justify why some changes take longer than others. So I think it gives an admin or a consultant a level of support rather than the business guys going, fine, you're just no good. Why can't you do this? I read the brochure. You should be able to do this tomorrow.
Or I drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of when you said the perfect customer is that 3-year-old customer, I kind of thought, well, that's when the Kool-Aid starts to wear off.
Yes, when reality sits in a bit, but I think we've seen how strategic orgs are now, how big they get. It's not just sales, it's sales, ERP, it's the strategic platform.
Yeah.
We can't be accidental admins. We can't be accidental architects. We need the tools, the proper tools to do the job. Salesforce shows no sign of wanting to build what we've built, what Capado's built, what Own Backup's built. So I think there's an opportunity for us to help Salesforce's customers deliver on the promise of Salesforce.
I think that's a very good message to finish on. So Ian, thank you for being our first repeat guest. It's been really good to have you on again and dive into this. We had this life cycle up on screen last time, but it's been really good to dive into it in a bit more detail and understand how you've connected the dots between all the different places that requirements can pop up. I was particularly pleased to see the Jira integration because that would be a big requirement from our point of view as we look to jump in and use elements as well. So really exciting product, really pleased you've built it, and thanks once again for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And Peter and I will be back next week, same time, same place. New topic, we don't know yet. We'll see what evolves, but we'll see everyone next week.
See you all then.